Hi, in this short video I shall explain how Western Canada ends up being the epicenter of toxic foods in Canada. The details are in my book, Poison Foods of North America, based on analysis of near 8,000 records of foods tested by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency between 2015 and 2016. So, Canada, I've shown here, makes the most toxic foods in the world, followed by United States, and way worse than foods made anywhere else outside of Canada and the United States. And not just that, within Canada, Western Canada has far more toxic locally produced food than all other parts of Canada, which makes Western Canada, from the prairies outwards, the epicenter of toxic foods on Earth. So you can navigate through the index at the beginning of the book and come to the section which talks about the regions within Canada and the worst food types by Canadian region. This is nearing the later part of the book, and it has a very interesting table. The whole table cannot fit in here, so only partially shown, but here you can see different food types represented by each row alphabetically, and you have these columns representing each regions of Canada, and a last column showing a comparison between the best and the worst. And in each food type, in each row, the worst reading, the highest concentration of glyphosate, whichever province has it, whichever area has it, is highlighted in red, and the best reading, the least amount of glyphosate in that food group, in whichever region, is highlighted in green. So the green is the best area where you can find that food type in Canada, and the red is the worst place where you can find it. And the last column shows the ratio between the best and the worst. For example, when it comes to oat bran from oat, the best is Quebec at 8.8 and the worst is Ontario at 441.8, which means there is a 50 times jump on this food group between Quebec and Ontario. Somebody having it, oat bran in Ontario, is getting himself or herself poisoned 50 times higher, at a 50 times higher dose or rate, 50 times faster than somebody having the same kind of food locally grown in Quebec. Story is also very similar for, say, pea flour between Quebec and, in this case, the western part of Canada, West Canada. The difference is almost 50 times. If you are in the West and you're eating pea flour, or eating foods made of pea flour, or making food of pea flour without carefully choosing what kind of pea flour you get hold of, you are getting poisoned about 50 times, 49.6 times faster or at a higher rate than if you're in Quebec. And finally, at the end of the chart, you can see the ranking. For each area, every green reading gets a +1 and red reading gets a -1. And the final aggregate rankings for the 4 regions are as follows. Atlantic has got +3, Quebec has got +4, the best reading, Ontario has +1, and Western Canada has -8. So that is the ranking. And if you want to avoid being poisoned faster, then depending on where you are, you might like to go through this list very carefully and then pick and choose what can be purchased off the cuff without bothering about too much about details, or where you should be much more discerning and find organic or definitively better source of food and avoid the most toxic, depending on which region you live in. And of course, if you are living in Western Canada, you need to be far more careful than if you are living almost anywhere else in Canada or United States or anywhere else on the planet Earth. Here we come across another interesting chart which is based on 4 regions of Canada: the West, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic. And there are 3 curved graphs there. One, the blue one is of Canadian made food. The pinkish one is the food made in the United States. And the brownish one is from 4 other countries: India, China, Italy, and Mexico. And how those foods stack up, how their glyphosate concentration appear if you are picking those foods up in 4 different regions of Canada. On the left, you have West, and you can see if you're buying foods made in Canada or the United States, the western part of Canada is probably the very worst, unless you are very careful in picking and choosing, as I said, what you pick up and what you avoid, and etc., and organic and not. West appears to be the worst when it comes to picking up Canadian and American food. In Ontario, the issue is a little different. United States food is much cleaner, while the Canadian-built food is just as bad. In Quebec, somehow both of them seem to be somewhat low, although the US-made food has crept up a little from 55 to 78, and then Atlantic is also low compared to the West and to some extent to Ontario, except for American-built food. So American food is probably best in Ontario, and Canadian food is probably best in Quebec. And in the West, both of them are the very worst. If you, on the other hand, pick up foods from India, China, Italy, and Mexico, there's not a whole lot of difference, and all of them are pretty clean and order of dimension cleaner. But even here, if you want to be really finicky, the best food is from Atlantic and the worst food is from the West. However, the differences are small. On the Atlantic, it is 2 parts per billion. In the West, it's 10 parts per billion. It's 5 times more, but it's still only 10 compared to 133 from United States and 174 from Canadian foods as picked up in the western part of Canada. And here is a chart at the same section of the book that gives another picture of how different regions of Canada stack up with the rest of the world, and how I found that the western part of Canada is the epicenter of toxic foods in the planet. Here, for clarification, the bar for the western part of Canada as well as average aggregate for all of Canada are in red. The other parts of Canada are in brown, and United States and the rest of the world are in ash blue. So the 4 regions of Canada, West, Ontario, Atlantic, and Quebec, are sorted in descending order based on average glyphosate content in foods picked up from there that are local origin. That means foods that are of Canadian origin picked up in these 4 different places. As you can see, Western Canada has the highest concentration of glyphosate in Canadian food at 174. Ontario stands close second at 166. Atlantic is at 84 and Quebec is at 56. The all Canadian average is 140 as against all United States average of 84 and the rest of the world of 18. Now, this goes to show that out of all these figures, Western Canada has the highest concentration of glyphosate in local food, which to me makes Western Canada the epicenter of toxic food in the planet, and it's almost 10 times as high as anything picked up from outside of North America, outside of Canada and USA. The average for Atlantic at 84 is at par with the average for all United States American food at 84 also. We do not have details to distinguish food from which part of United States is cleaner than which other parts. For that, somebody has to do extensive collections of food from different states or different regions within the United States and carry out a large data analysis, somewhat similar to what CFIA did for foods picked up in different regions of Canada. Without that, it is impossible for the data that we have to distinguish foods from different parts of United States. So the aggregate for United States is 84, which is same as the aggregate for local foods in the Atlantic region of Canada, also at 84. And actually the local foods in Quebec is markedly better than the average foods from United States, whereas the Canadian overall average is markedly worse than the average United States figure. And the rest of the world at 18 is an order of dimension cleaner from anything that you can pick up from anywhere within Canada and United States. So this is the chart that also bolsters my view that Western Canada is the epicenter of toxic foods on the planet.